Hello, I'm Food Daniel. Here are my predictions for the WFA games to be played on April 9th. Boston Renegades to Cleveland Fusion. Well, before last week, I'd say this is going to be a very interesting game, but now I'm not quite so sure. Cleveland got shut out at home last week by the Indy Crash. Indy Crash are a very good team, but still, if you can't score against Indy, I don't see how you're going to beat Boston. So I expect Boston to win this game. I'm going to say by 2 or 3 touchdowns. Wouldn't mind being wrong, though. I'm still hoping, Cleveland can break into the elite of the Eastern Conference. We'll see. Okay, the Richmond Black Widows at the Fayetteville Fierce. The Fierce are playing their first ever game. Black Widows played their first ever game last week and it went very well for them. They beat the Tri-Cities Thunder quite handily. Okay, I'm afraid I know absolutely nothing about the Fayetteville Fierce. Fayetteville, North Carolina. I don't know if that's a brand new team or if that's a rebranding of the old Carolina Raging Wolves or what. I do not know. I have no idea. But I do know the Black Widows hit the ground running, so in the absence of any information at all, I'll guess I predict the Black Widows. I can't pick a spread. We'll see. I expect the Black Widows to win. We'll see. Okay, Keystone Assault at the Philadelphia Phantoms. Well, the Assault got a rude welcome back to the WFA last week. They lost to the Comets by, I think it was 38-8 or something. Philadelphia Phantoms, they did quite well last week. They lost to Boston, but they lost 40-25. Against Boston, that's impressive. So this Philadelphia Phantoms team must be quite good. I mean, there must be a lot of veteran players there. So I'm going to predict Philadelphia to win this game. I'll say by 3 or 4 touchdowns. Detroit Dark Angels at the West Michigan Mayhem. Well, the Dark Angels had a rather easy win last week. While the West Michigan Mayhem, what'd they do? Oh yeah, they lost to Chicago last week. That doesn't mean much, losing to Chicago. I like both of these teams. I guess I'm predicting Detroit to win this game. It'll be close. I'll say 2 or 3 touchdowns. Detroit will win. Yeah. Chicago forced the Indy Crash. This will be pretty interesting. It'll be interesting to see what Indy does here against a real top shelf team. That game against Cleveland last week in a blizzard/lightning storm. Wow. Props all around to everybody for completing the game. That's great stuff. I don't think the Force will have too much trouble against Indy, but Indy will score a couple. I'll say Chicago by 3 or 4 touchdowns. Derby City Dynamite at the Atlanta Phoenix. Well, Dynamite got splattered last week by St. Louis. And Atlanta, they lost a nail-biter against Tampa Bay last week, 17-14. I expect Atlanta will win this game rather handily. I'll say by 4 or 5 touchdowns. Alabama Fire at the Tri-Cities Thunder. Boy, Alabama proved me wrong last week. I predicted them to lose. They won 76-0. Tri-Cities Thunder, I predicted them to win, and they lost 48-12 to the Richmond Black Widows. Okay, a bit too early to tell what all this means, but still, I'll predict the Alabama Fire will win. I'll say by 4 or 5 touchdowns. Oh, by the way, the Fire may have been proving me wrong in the score, but they proved me right in the attendance. I predicted the Fire will average about over 400 fans a game this year. Their first game had over 500 fans. Knew it. I knew it. Okay, the Daytona Wave Runners, the Tampa Bay Inferno. This is the first game of the year for the Daytona Wave Runners. While the Tampa Bay Inferno won that thriller against Atlanta, 17-14. I knew that too. I said it was going to be a very close game. Okay, Tampa Bay is probably the best team in Florida. Daytona, I think last year I know Daytona had a losing record, but I do know they had some surprisingly close games in there. I expect Tampa Bay to win, but I expect it'll be closer than you expect. I'll say by 2 or 3 touchdowns. Okay, the marquee game that everybody's waiting for, of course, the Dallas Elite at the DC Divas. Well, first of all, huge props to the Elite for not only agreeing to do this game, but insisting on doing this game. Yes. And this has been planned for long enough that I don't think there's going to be much roster attrition from the road trip. I mean, I expect all the major players and almost all the minor players in the Elite will be present for this game, yes. So that removes, the semi-pro home field advantage of having a full roster. On the other hand, the Divas do have a home field advantage in the form of the weather. I understand the weather forecast for that game. It's going to be very cold. It's going to be about 30 degrees, chance of snow. Now, I can't imagine the Divas are too used to it. They're probably used to practicing in it, don't know about playing in it. The Elite, though, that's probably pretty damn foreign to them. That might make a difference. And the very fact that the Elite insisted on playing the Divas and didn't mind doing so on the road, again, that tells you just how fire-breathing rabid they are to prove themselves and to get back to the championship game, have another crack at the title. The Elite are absolutely rabid for it. Still, this is a hard one. This is a hard one. If this wasn't the marquee game of the week, and maybe even the marquee game of the year, I'd beg off on a prediction altogether. But come on, a game like this, you can't beg off and make a prediction. You got to pick somebody. This is hard. That fury of the Dallas Elite versus the composure of the DC Divas. I'm still thinking if it's I think the weather might be a bit of a factor here. This is hard. I'll predict the Divas by 10 points or less. It'll be decided by 10 points or less. I know I'm going to get all sorts of flack for it from the Elite players, but I know if I predicted the Elite, the Divas give me flack too. I could easily be wrong about this, but I'll predict the Divas. Yeah. Okay. Another marquee game in the Midwest, the St. Louis Slam at the Kansas City Titans. This is the first game of the year for the Titans, while St. Louis had a huge blowout win last week against the Derby City Dynamite. Well, these are two top shelf teams, but I've noticed in the past few years, Kansas City is on a gentle downward trajectory, while St. Louis is on a gentle upward trajectory. I expect St. Louis to win this game. And I think it's going to be not quite as close as you expect. I'm going to say by 2 or 3 touchdowns, St. Louis will win. Okay, the Acadiana Zydeco at the Huntsville Tigers. Acadiana cutting off of a convincing win against the, I believe, the Austin Outlaws. Yes. And the Huntsville Tigers got crushed by the Atlanta Phoenix. Acadiana's going to win this game, and I think it's going to be gruesome. I'm going to say gruesome win for the Zydeco. Okay, the Austin Outlaws at the Arlington Impact. This is the first game of the year for the Impact. I know they've lost a couple players to Dallas last year, including Fancy Robinson. I don't know what's left of the team. They might be pretty good. They probably are pretty good. While Austin, I know last week I described them as being just a skeleton what they used to be, but they did score 20 points against the Zydeco last week, so maybe they're a bit more meatier of a skeleton than that. Still, I expect Arlington to win by 2 or 3 touchdowns. Okay, the Tacoma Trauma at the Seattle Majestics. Tacoma, a surprising squeaker of a win against the Southern Oregon Lady Renegades, 13-12. While the Majestics last week, an unsurprising win over the Everett Rain, 34-0. I understand from one of the former Trauma players that the Trauma had a fair bit of turnover last year, and that would seem to be supported by the closeness of their victory last week. While the Majestics, they're still the Majestics. I expect the Majestics to win this game with no trouble at all. I'll say by 4 or 5 touchdowns. Seattle wins. Okay, the Southern Oregon Lady Renegades, the Portland Fighting Shockwave. Okay, the Portland Fighting Shockwave, this is their first game of the year. Shockwave, they're a fusion of the Portland Shockwave and the Portland Fighting Phillies. The two teams merged, they are now the Portland Fighting Shockwave. Okay. So this should be, an improved Portland team. While the Lady Renegades, I know last week I was wondering if they even still existed because I couldn't find any web presence. Turns out they do have a web presence. I was looking for, Renegades or Lady Renegades. I should have looked for Lady Gades. I guess that's what their online name is. And no, their presence is jumping. And their roster is pretty damn big, especially for a town of only 70,000 people. And their inaugural game last week didn't go too badly. I mean, they lost 13-12. That's an exciting game against a Tacoma team that I expected was going to beat them rather handily. Be very interesting to see what happens here. I expect Portland to win. And I'll say by 3 or 4 touchdowns, probably closer to 3. Yeah. Okay, and a third marquee game. The Central Cal War Angels at the Pacific Warriors. This is the first game of the year for the Pacific Warriors, while the War Angels won an unsurprising blowout win over the West Coast Lightning last week. This one's hard to pick, too. And this is another game I'm going to get all sorts of flack no matter who I predict to win. The War Angels win. I was at that game last week. A couple of their key players weren't present at that game because they had other commitments, and they'll be back for this week. So the team will be even better. What throws a monkey wrench into these predictions is that both teams have picked up players from the San Diego Surge, so hard to say. I predict the War Angels to win, and I'll say by 2 touchdowns or less. War Angels, yes. 2 touchdowns or less. The Ventura Wolfpack at the West Coast Lightning. Okay, here are 2 teams that both got absolutely obliterated last week. But, as I say every time 2 bottom feeders match up, as a lifelong Tampa Bay Bucks fan, I know when bottom feeders match up, you can have very exciting games. And that might happen. And from what I saw from the Lightning last week, yeah, it was a blowout, but it wasn't all bad. They do have some skilled players there. As for Ventura, I didn't see any footage from their game, so I have no idea what their situation is. But I do know the Lightning do have some skill. So based on that, I'm going to predict the Lightning to win, and I'll say by 2 or 3 touchdowns. And finally, my Utah Blitz at the Sin City Trojans. This is the first game for the Blitz, while the Trojans beat the Ventura Wolfpack last week 82-0. This will be a gruesome win for the Trojans. But as a Blitz fan, the score isn't particularly interesting to me. When I look at the Blitz schedule, they do have a couple winnable games. Okay, the Blitz, if you remember last year, their problem is right off the bat from the start of the season, they barely had enough players to make roster. I mean, they were playing Iron Woman football all year long. This year, they do have a bit more. They have right about 20 players. And they do have a couple winnable games if they can keep the roster attrition to a minimum. I don't want to see them have to play Iron Woman football again this year. So to me, the important stat of this game against the Sin City Trojans isn't the final score. It's the injuries. Is the team still reasonably healthy? If they are, those couple winnable games the Blitz have will still be winnable. So go Blitz, and stay healthy. And that completes my predictions for week 2 of the WFA season. Thank you.